How's it going, everyone? In today's video we're going to be revisiting artist Locklead. This time around we're breaking down one of his tracks which came out as part of the second release on Up The Stuss, called Moon. This track is of quite a unique minimal style with a lot of those mellow, deep funk influences that you typically hear from this label. There's loads of cool sounds and techniques to break down for this one, so let's get into it.
Take me to the moon and back, baby, come round my way. I just wanna see your face, baby, come light my day. I just wanna feel you close, baby, come round my way. High on your supply all day. Take me to the moon and back, baby, come round my way. I just wanna see your face, baby, come light my day. I just wanna feel you close, baby, come round my way. High on your supply all day.
So the very first layer we have is this vocal.
Take me to the moon and back, baby, come round my way. I just wanna see your face, baby, come light my day.
This is an original vocal which I'd assume Locklead or one of their network recorded. Something I'd point you to if you're interested in finding out about Locklead and Chris Stuss's process is one of Stuss's recent blogs where you kind of get a bit of an insight into the way they do vocals there. So we've kind of got that spoken word vocal basically talking through a phrase.
Take me to the moon and back, baby, come round my way. I just wanna see your face, baby, come light my day.
Basically just a few lyrics, spoken word, which just really kind of fit the vibe of the track. And we've kind of got a few different color-coded sections.
The only one I see is you, baby.
This is kind of more of a sung version. And then the final part to this vocal is just this,
Take me to the moon and back.
which is just one of those kind of phrases reused as an ad-lib.
Take me to the moon and back.
So whenever I'm doing track breakdowns of these things, a lot of the time I'm basically taking DIY versions of their vocals, but I always kind of want to give you a bit of insight into how you might get something similar, and if I'm giving you that recommendation here, it's trying to get creative and record your own original ones. Up next we have the drums. I think the drums in this track are a bit more stripped back, purely because the vibe he was going for was kind of a bit more mellow, deep house kind of influenced, but there's a few kind of interesting things within them that we'll just kind of touch on. The first thing is we've got these kicks, emphasis on multiple. Layering kicks isn't usually something I would do, but when I was listening back, especially to, I think, the intro of the track, you hear certain textures come through. It sounds like there's a hi-hat on top, but then he's also got this kind of kick going throughout, playing almost like, I think it's like eighth notes. He's got a very kind of textured kick, so what we've essentially done is we've layered two kicks together. So I'll play this one. This one's quite clicky. You'll see there's some weird EQing going on where I've kind of brought out the highs a bit more. We've got this one, which is like a high-passed one. We've just kind of used that to add a bit more presence to the original one. And then what we're doing is we're adding this kind of kick hat. So this is kind of like this percussive layer. I've layered this hat. You'll hear it's basically coming in every 2 bars, and it's just kind of adding further presence up there. If we move further down onto the drums, we've got 3 claps. Then we've got a few hats, which I'll go through. We've got this closed one. We've essentially got the kind of main offbeat open hat here, but what we're doing a bit differently is we're adding extra notes to fill in the gaps, and we're bringing the velocity down, which creates this kind of driving hat. We've got this splash, which is kind of like an open hat, and it's basically being used to add this kind of percussive rhythm. We've got this open hat, pretty standard. We've got this shaker, Then we've got this hat loop. I always find adding a loop of some kind once you've done the majority of these one-shots can just really help to add that final polish to these subgroups. If I play them all together. So that's very much the hats, and then on the drum group we've just got a bit of group processing where we've used this preset from Ableton, and then we've got this kind of glue compressor to glue them all together. So that is the drums. The next group we'll look at is this instrument group, where I think the majority of this track is made. So up first we've got this bass. If I just quickly show the pattern, it's literally 2 notes. In terms of the sound, it is a sub bass, so you don't really have to overthink it as much, purely because it's not as audible, and the kind of role of the sub bass is kind of to be felt rather than heard. If I just quickly give a run through of how I made this sound, what I essentially did was I picked a random kind of wavetable. We've gone to these vowel ones, but essentially I'd be advising you to pick one with a bit more character as opposed to those kind of basic sine waves, just because they tend to be cleaner, and when you're filtering them down you don't hear them as much. So basically picked a random wavetable, pitched it down to, we've filtered it a bit more here, and we've added some drive. Then what we've done is we've layered it with a sub 1 octave down, just to really thicken out the sound essentially. The next layer we have is this Rhodes layer. So we've got these chords. You'll be noticing a theme here where there's very little variation, literally 2 bar patterns. So if we start with the actual sound, what I've used here is this Keys 4am preset. I think it's from one of Ableton's instruments called Electric, which is basically a bunch of electric pianos, Rhodes, keyboards and that kind of thing. So what I've done is I've picked this preset and I've just kind of enhanced it a bit. We've got an EQ, we've got this kind of bit warmer preset to add a bit of grit to it. Got this reverb, we've got a delay, but basically I think it's doing the kind of Hass effect to increase the stereo width. As you'll see, this is very subtle. We've got an actual delay, and then we've got a sidechain. So I'll play before and after. You'll hear a bit of grit. I think a lot of those kind of minimal keyboard sounds typically have a saturator or an erosion, which I haven't used, just to add a bit of texture to that sound. Something else I'll touch on actually, if you're looking for some decent presets that are kind of keyboard Rhodes style, I'd recommend the Arturia stuff. You basically flick through presets and basically modify some of the settings down here. You'll see that one's quite close to the original. So we've got this kind of Rhodes chord. If I just dive into the actual chords themselves, I believe we're in the key of B flat minor. What I think he's done here is he's basically taken the kind of minor chord and brought a few of those notes down, which kind of gives them a different tone. You'll see the different kind of color codings again. Something he's doing within this arrangement is he's constantly switching up things and varying the patterns somewhat just to keep it going. So we've got this. We'll see this one. This is more of that kind of jazzy one. That's a pretty common kind of jazzy rhythm. And then the only other variation he's got is this at the start, which is like this build up. So that's kind of the chords. This layer here kind of comes hand in hand with this one below. So I'll just play them together. So it's basically playing a kind of call and response, with that being the call and this kind of responding. We could in theory use the same sound, but I think here I wanted a bit more separation, so I basically used a different preset here and processed it as such. The only other thing I'll mention about these two Rhodes layers is you've obviously got the panning where they're both at different sides, which kind of helps with that call and response as well. Then if we move on to the guitar, once again, very simple in terms of patterns. The sound we've used comes from one of Ableton's stock instruments yet again. I think Ableton has quite a few different guitars, and I'd basically encourage you to check them out. The processing that we've done here is making quite a big difference. I've started off by widening the sound somewhat. We've got two EQs essentially doing crazy band passes. We've then got this echo, very subtle but helping the sound carry. Then we've got this chorus, and we've got this guitar compressor preset from Ableton. Something that's cool about this track is he's constantly doing these kind of switch ups within his arrangement. The way his track's arranged isn't really kind of standard, so I've kind of got rough markers with regards to sections, but he's not really got drops per se. If we were to kind of go off typical kind of structuring, the first part of his drop sounds like this. What I see. And then halfway through he's just switching up most of it, as you see the new layers and the different pattern. And then you've got that part which was the second half coming in the first half. So just loads of like interesting stuff like that, but it's just a great example of how to make so few layers just work so effectively. The final part we'll talk about is all these synths. The first one we have is this synth lead, which sounds like this. So it's quite a wacky sound. You hear a lot of these sounds in both Stussy and Locklead's tracks, where they're really obscure, but I think they just help to differentiate them from other producers. So I've used Serum for this. What I've done is I've used basic shapes. We've used the same wavetables, we've layered them, and we've altered the wavetable position. Something that's making a massive difference here is we've got the unison up to 3 on the second oscillator. The next part we've got is this envelope. With this envelope, the kind of main thing we've got here is we've got the sustain down quite a bit, and then we've got this decay just to make it quite plucky, and we've mapped that to the filter. We've altered the portamento to give it that kind of bendy glide effect. We've got these hyper and dimension effects, added this compressor, and then added a reverb. So that's it for the sound. For the actual effects, we've not done anything massively different. Probably a few wacky EQs, bit of reverb, bit of delay, kind of standard synth lead effects. Then for the pattern, we've got this. So I think this pattern's probably one of the more advanced ones to talk about. I think this is probably just an example of random experimentation and in the moment kind of creativity. I couldn't sit here and tell you this is how you write it, but if I was to play these patterns, you can probably begin to kind of hear how you'd write a melody in that case. And I think this is just a case of kind of filling in blanks and just having a jam along. So that is the melody, and then there's just kind of subtle variations once again. We've got these strings, just kind of sustained long notes. You will have seen me do that so many times. We've got this one. From this point up, I'd say all these are kind of like the main synths and melodic elements. These next three are kind of used more sparingly, mainly at the end of the track. We've got this pluck. So this pluck is kind of like a percussive texture, if I just play it in the context.
Take me to the moon and back, baby gon' ride my way. I just wanna see your face.
It's just been used as kind of like a new element, which doesn't have an important role in the track, but just something different. And then towards the end, you kind of hear these layers be fleshed out a bit more. We've got the siren, which is another kind of example of a really obscure sound, which is kind of the Locklead touch on this track, I think. So we've got that siren. It's basically a basic wave like this, bit of unison, got a bit of portamento on it, and then it's this overlap of notes which is causing it to glide. And then the final lead we have isn't that interesting, but I'll just play it. Kind of like a pad. So yeah guys, that is going to conclude our breakdown of Locklead's track Moon. This tune is a bit different in style to some of the minimal tracks we've looked at previously, but I hope it's given you plenty of inspiration nonetheless. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons, and be sure to share your thoughts down below. Also remember that the full project will be available to download from our Patreon if you want a deeper dive into all the sounds and the way I've done things. If you wish to carry on watching, then make sure you click on one of the recommendations I'll be leaving on screen, and I'll see you in the next one.